When people are asked to describe conservatives, one of the first words that comes to mind is capitalist. So the idea of a conservative that is not only skeptical to the free market, but completely opposed to it, seems contradictory and almost absurd. Most major conservative figures, from the Enlightenment to the Cold War, appear to support this economic system. So why would any conservative be outright opposed to capitalism? And what would a non-capitalist conservative society look like? These are the questions I hope to answer in this video, and by doing so I hope to show that anti-capitalist conservatism is both logically sound and a solution to many of the crises we face in our modern world. Before I explain the faults of capitalism, I will first describe what it is and the arguments in favor of it. This will show why conservatives have traditionally supported this system, what strengths the pro-capitalist argument has, and will lay the foundations for my argument against it. Capitalism is defined by the following traits. First, international trade is less restricted under capitalism compared to previous economic systems. Second, consumers are, for the most part, free to purchase what goods they want. Third, land is privately owned and said owners of the land can charge rent for its usage. Fourth, the productive tools of society are used by private entities known as corporations or capitalists. Fifth, said private owners have profit as their main priority. Sixth, the search for profit by private capitalists leads to technological innovation, both in the form of labor-saving devices and new consumer goods. 7. Labor is treated as a commodity, like any other, that can be freely sold on the market to capitalists who use it as a factor of production. Now that I have laid the framework for what falls under the umbrella of capitalism, I will explain why so many conservatives have supported this system. First, free trade is more efficient than restricted trade due to the nature of comparative advantage. Just as some people are better suited at one job compared to another, certain countries are better at producing one good compared to another, due to the skills of its population, pre-existing tools, and natural resources. By focusing on producing what they are best at, countries increase the total amount of goods on the market. If America focuses on producing machine parts, while Brazil focuses on producing coffee, they will both get more of these goods than if they tried to produce both of them domestically. Second, people are more free to purchase goods which make their lives easier, make them happy, and even sometimes add meaning to their lives. For example, labor-saving devices, such as vacuum cleaners and washing machines, have lessened the amount of time and effort people have to allocate for cleaning, and much of our traditions around Christmas originate from the Victorian era, which only could have happened because of that era's industrialization and consumer culture, which occurred because of capitalism. This is unlike previous economic systems like feudalism, where even very wealthy people, like merchants, were prevented from buying or using certain goods, like types of clothing, because they were seen as class signifiers, defining who was noble-born and who was not. Third, private ownership of land and capital can be seen as aligning with the more traditional view of natural rights. People have a right to the property they bought and are free to do what they desire. Fourth, the profit motive rewards people for hard work and competence, and promotes those values in broader society. Fifth, technological innovation in both production and consumer goods has led to many quality of life improvements. Famines are less likely than in previous eras, and people's quality of life is greater than in pre-capitalist eras. 6. People under capitalism can freely sell their labor, unlike previous economic systems, like slavery, where people themselves were seen as property and thus were forced to work, or like feudalism, where there were restrictions on who a person could work for and where a person could work. Very well, but if all of this is true, then why do I believe that conservatives should be anti-capitalists? Here are just a few reasons I could think of. First, free trade can make nations dependent on their rivals for vital goods and materials, and it makes nations less capable of defending themselves in wars. Also, comparative advantage is not absolute. Why shouldn't nations try to modify it through government-funded education, which provides training for workers, or government subsidies for industries it sees as valuable? Second, capitalism encourages consumption and hedonism as values for consumers. It destroys all other traditional values, such as temperance, family focus, love for one's country, and charity. Conspicuous consumption, or consumption that is done just as an act of showing off, is also uniquely harmful and a unique feature of capitalism. Third, Private ownership of land leads to literal rent-seeking behavior. If the value of the land around a lord's property increases, so does the landlord's own property. Landlords do not need to improve the product they are selling. They simply buy an asset and collect revenue. There is a limited amount of land, especially in cities. People can't just make new land easily. Fourth, capitalism pushes the pursuit of profit as the main value for capitalists. Similar to pushing hedonism on consumers, this can erode the moral character of capitalists. They prioritize profit over other things in their control, such as the well-being of their workers and the environment. They don't care about the negative externalities. Fifth, technological innovation leads to automation, destruction of jobs people found meaning in, and a weakening of the bargaining power of workers, which are the majority of the population. Also, some of the more useful and non-harmful technological innovations, such as certain types of medicine, space travel, and the internet, have been greatly helped by public sector research and the government. Sixth, workers are commodified under capitalism. They have to earn a wage from a capitalist in order to live, which is becoming increasingly difficult. This economic insecurity and disempowerment can prevent people from starting families. It also leads people to feel disconnected from their lives. A third of their life is spent taking orders from a person who has power over them for no legitimate moral reason and who does not care for them. Also, the push towards making human labor more interchangeable and tradable has led to the rise of working women. This is a threat to greater gender relations and the traditional family. This push for free trade in labor has also led to mass migration and the diluting of certain people groups and cultures, especially in the West. Seventh, natural rights, individualism, and protection of private property are not absolute. They make logical and rational sense, but biologically, humans prize things such as community, family, social identity, and power over their own lives. Capitalism is a threat to this for the reasons previously stated. A lack of rational thought is a major argument libertarians give for depriving animals of natural rights. While humans can use reason, we primarily exist as intelligent animals. While natural rights are important for having a functioning society and for people to enjoy their lives, if they cause mass societal harm, like in the case of capitalism, why shouldn't the majority of individuals who comprise the society do what is in their own individual ego's interest and interfere with the natural rights of a hostile minority, the capitalists? Since we have laid down the reasons conservatives should be against capitalism, I will provide a positive alternative to the capitalist system. For the sake of the video, I will call my combination of policies impletism, from the Latin impletio, meaning fulfillment. First, with regards to trade, countries should have a baseline of free trade to reap the benefits of comparative advantage. They should especially encourage the import of raw goods and lower value-added products. Importing cheap raw materials actually helps boost domestic manufacturing, likewise with cheap manufactured goods which have little value added with labor. For the sake of national security, trade should also be balanced in the long term to prevent the nation from becoming a debtor with a devalued currency. Trade with rival powers should also be restricted, and the nation should try to encourage the manufacture of elements essential for modern war. This will depend on the size, population, and resources of a country, but generally, large nations should promote domestic manufacture of items such as steel, microchips, drones, firearms, and heavy weapons. This can be done through tariffs, subsidies, and industrial planning. Second, with regard to consumer products, people should generally be free to purchase what goods make them happy, but this should be restricted if said goods could harm the individual or the social fabric of society more broadly. This includes restrictions on purchasing drugs which could harm people's health and relationships, weapons of mass destruction which could harm people's lives, lewd or erotic materials which weaken people's desire for romance and pair bonding, unhealthy and addictive food products which also harm people's health, and goods of conspicuous consumption which serve no function beyond bragging, like fashion clothing or luxury brands. Third, with regard to private ownership of land, it should be heavily restricted. In cities, most land should be owned by the government, like in Singapore. It can be rented out in the productive use in industry, housing, and the like. This acquisition of land should be attempted by purchasing it from its previous owners. City land can be rented to private industries so they can build safe, cheap, and livable apartments. But if they ever fall behind demand, the government can build more public housing on the land it owns. In the countryside, where people put their labor into the ground and work more in farming, land should be free to purchase and own. But it should be heavily taxed so the idle or unproductive use of land and rent seeking behavior is disincentivized. With land taxes, if a person increases rent, their taxes also increase. So any increase in rent comes from a desire to use the revenue to actually improve the service and thus attract demand. Fourth, taxes are inherently punishing. Nobody likes losing money. So behavior that is productive and moral should not be taxed, while behavior which is immoral and which ought to be disencouraged should be taxed. Usage of the scarce resource of land should be taxed. Negative externalities like pollution or environmental damage should also be taxed. Limited tariffs should also be put on foreign industries which are competing with domestic manufacturers. Taxes should also be imposed on whatever harmful consumer products the government still allows to be bought and sold, such as cigarettes, alcohol, sugary foods, and luxury goods. Incomes should not be taxed, except a small percentage of 5% that goes into a state pension, which the person will receive later or can voluntarily opt out of. Adding value to products should not be taxed. The sale of goods in general should not be taxed, with the exception, of course, of some foreign products and luxury goods. Private ownership of capital and the means of production should be allowed for small enterprises, those who employ 200 people or less. This small grouping will make it easier and more likely for workers to be able to organize together, and will make it more likely for their boss to see them as people and human beings with lives that matter, and not just labor inputs. It will also allow for the society to reap the benefits of private enterprise. Industries that employ larger numbers of people should first be required to democratize through legislation. This would entail the workers taking over the management and running of the company. If the shareholders try to use their wealth to push against this, then legislation should be introduced which proletarianizes the industry, taking its ownership away from the private investors, making the workers the owner of the company. Industries which provide weapons of war should all be nationalized. Otherwise, private capitalists will lobby for more wars and increase the demand for their product. They could also price gouge in times of great need for military equipment, such as in the middle of a war. Certain utilities which form natural monopolies and do not run on the usual profit model, such as roads, rail lines, power plants, sewage treatment plants, and water distribution systems, should all be owned by the government. Aside from these, the government should avoid owning industry. It is not as efficient at meeting consumer demand like capitalists, and it is not as representative as workers-owned businesses and cooperatives. Sixth, the management and ownership of most industry by workers will stop the current push for automation, as workers will generally find meaning in what they do and will not like their job to disappear. This will prevent the mass unemployment which will come about from automation under our current capitalist system. The rapid progress of technology will also be curtailed by the government, as technological change often leads to social change, which is disruptive and costly to the moral character of society. For instance, artificial wombs could help homosexuals reproduce, which would further destroy the traditional family. Or genetic engineering could lead to certain useful human traits being tossed aside without regard. Or it could lead to humans diverging so much genetically, where we are no longer a single species anymore, which will make cooperation much more difficult. Overall, the era of rapid technological growth, which we have seen since the start of the Industrial Revolution, should come to an end. The only technological progress which should be pushed for is in the fields of increasing agricultural yield, certain types of medicine, space travel and exploration, and especially the military. The military of any nation or group of nations which adopt this economic policy should be used to strong-arm the planet into adopting this system. The existence of even a single capitalist society could lead to the negative impacts of its technology and social change spilling out and corrupting our conservative culture. But generally, military force will not be needed, since almost all people which live in free democratic societies and countries will want to implement these policy changes when they see their success. Seventh, overall, the economic system should be structured so that families are encouraged to be self-employed in private ventures where the father is at the head and the mother and children are working with him. This will lead to a greater security around employment, will lead to a return of traditional gender and family roles, will boost birth rates as children will no longer be seen as a great expense, and parents will be able to care for them on the job. This will also prevent labor exploitation as the father will love his wife and children unlike a capitalist. Policies should be implemented which make buying or renting large homes for families cheaper, so that regardless of the work or specialization of families, they will be able to have gardens which they can use to grow about 25% or more of their caloric needs, and which can simulate family farming on a small scale. Overall, I hope you liked my video, and if you did, you should click the next one on your screen. If it's not there yet, you should like and subscribe so you don't miss out on my next upload. Thanks for watching till the end. Goodbye.